let's begin. 10% Happier is the story of Dan Harris. Dan Harris is an ABC News correspondent. I think he's still an ABC News correspondent. And he has led a very high-charged life. He's gone to Afghanistan and reported on the war in real time. He's been in the Middle East and disaster zones several times. This is a person who has like a very high-strung life. And he is kind of an adrenaline junkie in the beginning of the book. He gets addicted to cocaine. He has a lot of just like issues that I identify with, not the cocaine, but like overeating and just kind of like a high-powered adrenaline lifestyle where if you're not doing something all the time, you don't feel like you're alive. So Dan Harris is successful by any measure. He's in front of tens of thousands of people. His career is skyrocketing, and he is living this adrenaline-filled life, but he's stressed like crazy, and he's unhappy. And Dan Harris, and this is the real core theme of this book that I want to impart to you, is that when I'm looking for self-improvement type stuff, I am looking for material that strips the sort of spiritual element, the kind of like up in the clouds element, out of self-improvement and brings it down to a hard practical level, because that's what we identify with in this day and age. So once he kind of identifies his adrenaline-fueled lifestyle and that this is a problem that's leading to him unhappiness and stress and probably an early death, he says, I got to fix this. And the first person he finds is a guy named Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle wrote a book called The Power of Now. Was like an Oprah book club, a New York Times like bestseller. It says it's a guide to spiritual enlightenment. But Eckhart Tolle was the first person that Dan Harris encountered and found out that his kind of view of spirituality was not accessible. That when you really sit someone down and you say, look, how do I improve my life? They say, well, like you have to focus on the present and you have to try to be more objective and realize that you are a finite being and you're going, it's like a lot of like really like high level concepts. And Dan is like just looking for like, no, like just give me the meat of it. Give me the gist of it. Something that I can practice, something I can do in real time. And he doesn't find that through Eckhart Tolle. So the next person he goes to is Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra is another big self-improvement person. Now, this guy, I've read a lot of his books, and this guy is even too spiritual for me. This guy writes some crazy stuff. So here's some book titles, okay? You Are the Universe, Quantum Healing, Super Genes, The Soul of Leadership, Life After Death. He has written a ton of books, by the way, like a ridiculous amount of books. And again, so Dan Harris goes to him and realizes that it's just a little bit too weird, a little bit inaccessible. And so he backs off of that too. Dan had a lot of problems with just like absorbing this kind of person. And so Dan is now at a point where he knows that he has to change something. And in fact, his life events are kind of culminating in this really big moment, this adrenaline like fueled moment, which is a famous panic attack that he has on live TV. So this is an old broadcast, and we'll show what happens.
Embarrassing day of my life.
We're going to go now to Dan Harris, who's at the news desk. Dan.
Good morning, Charlie and Diane. Thank you.
This is me 10 years ago. And the reason this is the most embarrassing day of my life is not that it looks like I've been attacked by a blow dryer and a can of hairspray. No, it's that I am about to freak out on national television.
Health news now. One of the world's most commonly prescribed medications may be providing a big bonus. Researchers report people who take cholesterol...
Listen to him like breathe. It's crazy.
...lowering drugs called statins for at least 5 years may also lower their risk for cancer. But it's too early to prescribe statins slowly for cancer production.
At this point, I realize I'm helpless, so I bail right in the middle.
That does it for news. We're going to go back now to Robin and Charlie.
All right, thanks very much, Dan Harris at the news desk with some of the headlines.
So he has an outright panic attack on national TV, and now he knows he has to do something. This is a result of cocaine, stress, crazy high-powered lifestyle, and he hasn't been able to get any help really, or not a lot of help from these spiritual gurus, right? These Eckhart Tolles and these Deepak Chopras, but he has found something there. That he knows there's something to it. So he got a lot out of The Power of Now, and Tolle's new book after that was A New Earth. And he knew that there was something there to be learned, but it's just sort of like shrouded in this just too much spirituality, too much like kind of fluff. But he's having this real problem. So then he meets a person. He meets a person named Mark Epstein, and Mark Epstein introduces him to a technique called meditation, a technique called, I believe it was Vipassana meditation, and says, hey, like, let's strip the spiritual mumbo jumbo and let's do this. Let's meditate for 10 minutes a day. And that's how Dan Harris started. He started by doing 5-10 minutes, which he could barely handle, on either in his office or on the floor of his bedroom, basically wherever he could. And the rest of this book is the story of how that singular practice eventually culminated in a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which I'll explain in a moment, has changed his life for the better, and how he suspects that other people will be changed as well. And so herein we have the title of the book, 10% Happier, meaning that if you practice meditation on a regular basis, you will, in his opinion, be about 10% happier. This is a catchphrase that he developed after he'd been meditating for a while. He couldn't figure out how to sell this to people because it was attached to such a weird spiritual idea. So he said, if you just meditate, you'll be about 10% happier. And that was something that kind of caught on. And that's pretty great. That means every 1 in every 10 minutes of your day is going to be happier. That's pretty awesome. It's a really big change, I think, in almost everybody's life if you're 10% happier. The other thing I want to say is it's also a realistic change. It's a change that if you're 10%, it's not 50% happier, 75% happier. It's not this cured my erectile dysfunction and now I'm like slaying chicks like back and forth. I have millions of dollars. I closed my eyes and I imagined it, and there's a new Porsche in my driveway. Like, it's not that kind of thing, right? It's not the sort of self-improvement that's promised to you by these like these more like fluffy like The Secret and things like that. This is 10% happier. It's not 75% happier. It's 10% happier. A very realistic outcome for doing something realistic. Which over the course of the book, he goes through the empirical data, both his own research as well as other people's research on meditation. And the data on the benefits of meditation, the scientific data, is unreal. There are hundreds of studies, thousands of studies that show unbelievable benefits from meditation. From basic things like lowering blood pressure and stress to really crazy stuff like growing new brain matter, neurogenesis, reduction of major diseases. It is an awesome practice. And he talks a lot about that. So Dan Harris takes up meditation, and the second half of the book is his approach to self-development, which is a very human approach that I really like because he doesn't take on the persona of a person who is like holier than us. He's a jerk. He's aware he's a jerk. He's not perfect. He acknowledges his faults in a really human way, but he says things that are profound that you can tell that are authentic to him as a result of his own experience of things. Someone as skeptical as Harris finds meditation helpful and eventually comes out to his coworkers about being a meditator, makes my own attempts to meditate justifiable. I think he quotes some compelling evidence of the effectiveness of meditation and shows how it has helped him in concrete ways. He doesn't claim that he's had some kind of incredible transformation, but he says that he has negative thoughts still and sometimes struggles to quiet the jerk inside his head. He just seems like a regular guy, and that's what makes this such a good book. That's the gist of 10% Happier, basically. There is a bunch of other aspects of it that I want to highlight now that I think are really cool. The kind of like central idea of this. When I refer to the ego, I'm referring to the big cloud of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and things that make up our self-identity. Your ego, we all have one, is constantly assessing your self-worth in relation to the rest of the world. So it's looking at how much money you have. You're looking at your looks, your social status, and then you're finding people and things to compare yourself against. A good example of like a very easy comparison is like everybody in Formula One racing is like a ridiculously hot guy, and they're super young and they're like crazy, crazy hot. I just don't know how to describe them besides they're hot. I mean, they're also really wealthy. They're super famous, and they're like just like so. Like when I'm watching F1, I'm like, man, I am never ever going to be that dude, right? That's never a person that I can even get close to. Even if I was gonna get as fit and as popular as one of those people, I just wouldn't be as young. So can't do it at some level. And that's the ego making that comparison. It's comparing ourselves to things and people around us and us not being good enough for those things and people. And the default setting of the ego, the default setting is more, right? Because I don't look good enough, because that guy has more money than me, or because that girl is hotter than me, because that person is more successful than me, I need more success, money, whatever. But the problem with the ego is it's this never-ending feedback loop. It just never ends, right? The minute that you give it a new achievement, the baseline for its desire is reset and it starts looking for a new thing. And I think without a lot of training and self-awareness, you're still not going to get there. It just doesn't seem to me that there's anything you can do besides get self-awareness to make yourself happier. Okay, so how do you get self-awareness? Well, you meditate. It seems to be the only way that human beings can do it, or some form of meditation. My favorite chapter was a chapter called Hide the Zen, where Dan was first having a problem where he was meditating a lot, and meditation has this way of making you sort of disconnect from the results of things, so you become less invested in the outcomes in your life. Now, that can be good or bad, right? Obviously, it can be good because it makes you less stressed. It can be bad too because you don't achieve at a high level, or as high a level as you may want. And one of the biggest criticisms I get about meditation when I teach this is, well, how do I keep my edge? How do I keep being invested in the world if I'm just going to disconnect and be apathetic about everything? Because a lot of people associate Buddhism with apathy. But Hide the Zen, the chapter, is about this, where previously in the book, Dan has this period of time where he gets slow and his career starts to drop off. His bosses notice it. He stops like going aggressively for the stories. This is a really cool kind of like progression of this book, because the first part of the book you could see like he's emailing producers, he's complaining when he doesn't get a story. He's on it, right? So he's just getting more hustle because he's getting like more opportunity because he's just hustling harder. He drops off as he starts to meditate, and then he becomes worried about this. And Hide the Zen is about his realization of how to keep your edge and how to strive while still being detached from the outcomes. You can always strive, but that thought has to be tempered by the realization that the universe is ultimately entropic, meaning that everything that we have here in some amount of time, probably soon, is going to fade away, is going to die. So the beauty of conceptualization of impermanence is that life becomes infinitely more beautiful when you know it's going to end, when you know that every minute might be your last minute. And it's not necessarily something in the future. One of us will probably die much earlier than 75 or 80. And maybe one of us is a few months away from dying, right? That concept is something you really don't want to think about. You might want to like click the X on that stream because you're like, man, this guy is talking some real stuff. Like, I don't think I want to hear this right now. But you need to understand that, because that is what is going to make your life enriched. That is what's going to finally get you off your ass to do the things that you want to do, to be the person that you want to be. And when you meditate on this impermanence, when you think about that impermanence, when you confront that issue, that real issue, it's gonna make the real issue, the truth of it, right? And you don't ignore it, your life is gonna be so much more valuable. So, and you're gonna strive so much more, right? Like it's not gonna be the situation of apathy that Buddhism is typically accused of, or people that meditate are typically accused of. It's gonna be the opposite. You're gonna want to do everything you possibly can to harness the moments of this life and make it into something of your own design that you're proud of. Hide the Zen is a chapter on a high level about this, where you can strive and push, and you ought to strive and push, and you should, but temper it by the knowledge that this is going away. So that you are, and I'm going to quote directly from Dan Harris here in the chapter. So I just love this quote. If you don't waste your energy on variables you can't influence, you can focus more on those you can. You do everything you can to succeed, but you aren't attached to the result of succeeding. Meaning that when an outcome happens that is bad, you aren't attached to that outcome emotionally, and you are ready to kind of like pick yourself back up and go after the next success. I think this is the most important part of this book, and the most important part of like what meditation can teach you.
Walk, little walk, small talk, big thoughts. Gonna tell them all just what I want.